The warm blood trailed down Grace Kelly's forearm as she staggered through the rugged terrain, her elegant traveling dress now torn and soiled with dust from the unforgiving Nevada landscape. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life in Alta, California, had been violently interrupted just hours earlier when the stagecoach carrying her and her life savings was ambushed by masked bandits. Grace clutched her wounded arm, the shallow cut stinging with each movement. The bandits had taken everything: her money, her luggage, even the locket containing the only image of her late parents. The driver and the guard had been shot dead, their bodies left sprawled beside the overturned coach. Through some miracle or perhaps cruel twist of fate, the bandits had spared her life, though they dragged her from the coach and left her alone in the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a warning that death would find her if she tried to follow them. The setting sun cast long shadows across the trail as Grace pushed forward, her throat parched and her stomach empty. She had been walking for hours, following what she hoped was the route to the nearest settlement. Her once fashionable boots, designed for city streets rather than desert trails, had begun to blister her feet mercilessly. "Just keep moving," she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Someone will come. Someone must come." But as darkness fell over the landscape, Grace's strength finally gave out. She collapsed beneath a twisted juniper tree, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The distant howl of a coyote sent a shiver down her spine as she curled into herself, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her body as the desert night turned bitterly cold. Miles away, Hunter Caldwell guided his horse along a familiar trail, returning from delivering a herd of cattle to Carson City. At 32, Hunter had spent most of his life in the saddle, working as a ranch hand before saving enough to purchase his own modest spread just outside Alta. The journey had been profitable, and he looked forward to reaching the comfort of his cabin the following afternoon. The first light of dawn found Hunter awake early, as was his habit. As he packed his bedroll and prepared to continue his journey, his keen eyes caught something unusual in the trail ahead. He dismounted, crouching to examine the ground more closely. "Well now," he muttered to himself, running his fingers over the distinct impression in the dust. "These ain't the tracks of any cowpoke or Indian." The footprints were small and neat, clearly made by a woman's boot, and recent enough that the edges remained sharp despite the gentle morning breeze that had begun to erase other markings in the trail. What concerned Hunter more was the occasional smear of what appeared to be blood alongside the tracks. Hunter straightened, pushing his weathered hat back on his forehead as he surveyed the landscape. These weren't the marks of someone traveling with companions. These were the tracks of someone alone and in trouble. "Come on, Thunder," he said to his chestnut gelding, swinging back into the saddle. "Let's see where these lead us." He followed the footprints cautiously, alert for any sign of danger. The tracks told a story of increasing struggle, the stride becoming shorter, more uneven, with occasional places where the person had clearly stopped to rest. After about a mile, Hunter spotted a splash of color beneath a juniper tree that didn't belong to the natural landscape. Grace awakened to the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Fear shot through her body as she scrambled to her feet, wincing at the pain in her blistered heels. Had the bandits returned to finish what they'd started? She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the sparse vegetation offered little cover. The horseman came into view around a bend in the trail. Tall and broad-shouldered, he rode with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this harsh country. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but she could see he wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, not the flashy attire favored by outlaws. Still, Grace wasn't taking any chances. She grabbed a fist-sized rock from the ground, prepared to defend herself if necessary. Hunter reined in his horse about 20 feet from the woman, immediately assessing the situation. She stood with her back to the juniper tree, her dress torn and dirty, hair falling in tangles around a face that, despite being streaked with dust, was uncommonly beautiful. But what struck him most was the determined set of her jaw and the rock clutched in her trembling hand. "Madam," he said gently, removing his hat to appear less threatening. "I mean you no harm. Name's Hunter Caldwell. I've got a ranch near Alta." Grace didn't lower her makeshift weapon. "How do I know you're not with them?" "With who, madam?" Hunter asked, keeping his voice calm. "The bandits. The ones who robbed the stagecoach and left me here to die." Understanding dawned on Hunter's face. "The Carson City stage was supposed to come through yesterday," Grace nodded warily. "I'm no bandit, madam, just a rancher heading home." Hunter slowly reached for his canteen. "Looks like you could use some water." The mention of water broke through Grace's defenses. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and the rock suddenly seemed impossibly heavy in her hand. She lowered it slowly. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible. Hunter dismounted but kept his distance, respecting her wariness. He placed the canteen on the ground and stepped back, allowing her to approach it on her own terms. Grace moved forward cautiously, never taking her eyes off him as she retrieved the canteen. The first sip of cool water was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted, and she had to force herself not to gulp it all down at once. "Small sips," Hunter advised. "Too much at once will make you sick." As Grace drank, Hunter noticed the dried blood on her arm. "You're hurt." "It's just a scratch," she replied, though the wound still throbbed painfully. "One of them had a knife. I was lucky." Hunter's expression darkened. "Doesn't sound like luck had much to do with yesterday, madam." "Grace," she said after a moment. "My name is Grace Kelly." Hunter nodded. "Miss Kelly, I'd like to help you if you'll let me. My horse can carry us both to Alta. There's a doctor there who can tend to your arm, and the sheriff will want to hear about what happened." Grace hesitated, weighing her options. The reality was she had none. Alone in the wilderness, she wouldn't survive another day. This cowboy was offering her only chance. "I have nothing to pay you with," she admitted. "They took everything." A gentle smile crossed Hunter's weathered face. "I'm not asking for payment, just doing what any decent man would do." The sincerity in his blue eyes convinced her. Grace nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." "Hunter," he corrected, moving forward carefully to help her. "Can you ride?" "I grew up on a farm in Ohio," she said with a hint of pride. "I can ride." Hunter's smile widened as he helped her onto Thunder's back before mounting behind her. The closeness felt strange to Grace, improper by any standard of etiquette, but under the circumstances, propriety seemed a distant concern. As they set off at a gentle pace, Grace found herself leaning back against Hunter's solid chest, her body surrendering to exhaustion now that the immediate danger had passed. "Rest if you need to," Hunter told her, his voice rumbling against her back. "I'll see you safe to Alta." Grace meant to thank him again, but the rhythmic motion of the horse and the security of Hunter's arm steadying her soon lulled her into a deep sleep. Hunter felt the exact moment when Grace surrendered to exhaustion, her body becoming heavier against his. He adjusted his hold, careful not to disturb her while ensuring she wouldn't fall. Looking down at her dirt-streaked face, he felt a surge of anger toward the men who had left her to die in the wilderness. The stagecoach robbery would need reporting, but for now, his priority was getting this woman to safety. He estimated they were about 5 hours from Alta at their current pace, and he was reluctant to push Thunder faster with the double burden. Grace slept for nearly 2 hours before awakening with a start, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings. "Easy," Hunter said softly. "You're safe." Reality rushed back, and Grace straightened slightly, embarrassed to have been sleeping against this stranger's chest. "I'm sorry." "I didn't mean to. No need for apologies," Hunter interrupted gently. "Been a rough time for you." Grace nodded, taking in their surroundings. The landscape had changed subtly, the flat desert giving way to more varied terrain with occasional scrub and patches of grass. "How much farther to Alta?" she asked. "Should reach it by late afternoon," Hunter replied. "There's a creek not far ahead where we can rest the horse and get some fresh water." True to his word, they reached a small creek within the hour. Hunter dismounted first, then offered his hand to help Grace down. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground, her muscles stiff from the ride and her previous ordeal. Hunter steadied her with a strong hand on her elbow. "Take it slow." While Thunder drank from the creek, Hunter unpacked some beef jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. "Not exactly a feast," he apologized, offering Grace a portion. "It's wonderful," she assured him, the simple food tasting better than any fine dining she'd experienced in her previous life. As they ate, Grace found herself studying her rescuer more carefully. Hunter Caldwell appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His features were strong, a straight nose, square jaw covered in a few days' stubble, and eyes the color of the Nevada sky. Not conventionally handsome, perhaps, but there was something compelling about his face, a quiet strength that made her feel secure in his presence. "May I ask what brings you to these parts, Miss Kelly?" Hunter inquired, breaking into her thoughts. Grace hesitated, then decided there was little point in secrecy. "I was traveling to California to take a position as a schoolteacher in Sacramento," she explained. "After my parents died last winter, there was nothing left for me in Ohio." Hunter nodded thoughtfully. "Teaching's important work." "It was to be my fresh start," Grace said, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Now, with everything gone, I don't know what I'll do." Hunter took a thoughtful sip from his canteen. "Alta's a growing town. Might be they need a teacher there. Won't know till we ask." Hope flickered briefly in Grace's heart, though she tried to temper it. "Perhaps. Though I imagine proper introductions are customary, rather than arriving half-dead and penniless." A smile tugged at the corner of Hunter's mouth. "Folks in Alta aren't much for ceremony. They value grit more than polish." They finished their meal in companionable silence before continuing their journey. This time, Grace was more aware of Hunter's presence behind her, the strength of his arms as he held the reins on either side of her, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, partly to distract herself from their proximity and partly out of genuine curiosity. "Nothing fancy," Hunter replied. "About 100 acres with a small herd of cattle. Cabin needs some work, but the land's good. Got a stream running through the property year-round, which is worth more than gold in these parts. You manage it alone, mostly. Hire help for roundups and drives. Got a good friend, Javier, who works with me regular during busy seasons." Grace was impressed. "It sounds like you've built something worthwhile." "Trying to," Hunter acknowledged. "Been at it 5 years now. Another good season or two I might even add on to the cabin." The conversation continued easily as they rode. Grace learning about life in Alta and Hunter hearing about her upbringing in Ohio. Despite the circumstances of their meeting, Grace found herself enjoying Hunter's company. There was an honesty to him that she found refreshing after the artifice of city society she'd encountered during her journey west. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Hunter pointed to the valley below. "Alta," he said simply. Grace gazed down at the town nestled in the valley. It was smaller than she'd imagined, a collection of wooden buildings lining a main street, with scattered homesteads visible in the surrounding countryside. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could make out people moving about their business. "It's not much compared to Sacramento," Hunter said, a note of defensiveness in his voice. "It looks like a real home," Grace replied softly. "More than I can say for anywhere I've been lately." Hunter's arm tightened slightly around her waist, a gesture that might have been unconscious but felt protective nonetheless. "Let's get you to the doctor first, then see about finding you a place to stay." As they rode down the main street of Alta, Grace became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. Townsfolk stopped to stare as Hunter guided Thunder toward a modest building with a sign identifying it as Dr. Wilson's office. Before they reached it, a man wearing a sheriff's badge stepped into the street, raising his hand in greeting. "Hunter, wasn't expecting you back so soon." The sheriff's eyes moved to Grace, taking in her condition with concern. "What's happened here?" "Sheriff Brooks," Hunter acknowledged, dismounting before helping Grace down. "This is Miss Grace Kelly. She was on the Carson City stage when it was robbed yesterday. Bandits killed the driver and guard, left her for dead on the trail." Sheriff Brooks's expression hardened. "Madam, I'm mighty sorry to hear that. Been getting reports of stage robberies over in Elko County, but this is the first one this close to Alta." "Miss Kelly's hurt," Hunter continued. "Thought Dr. Wilson should take a look at her arm before we talk more." The sheriff nodded. "Of course. I'll be by later to get your statement, Miss Kelly. We'll do everything we can to catch these men." Dr. Wilson turned out to be a kind older gentleman who treated Grace's arm with gentle efficiency. "You're fortunate," he told her as he bandaged the wound. "The cut's not deep enough for stitches. Keep it clean and it should heal nicely." While the doctor worked, Hunter explained their situation to the sheriff in the next room. Grace could hear their muffled voices but couldn't make out the words. When the doctor finished, Hunter returned with Sheriff Brooks. "Miss Kelly," the sheriff began, "Hunter's told me what he knows, but I need to hear from you directly. Can you describe the men who attacked the stage?" Grace recounted the robbery in as much detail as she could, describing the 3 masked bandits and their distinctive voices. One had been tall and thin with a raspy voice, another stockier with a southern drawl, and the third, the one who'd cut her, had worn an unusual silver ring with a turquoise stone. "That last detail might be useful," Sheriff Brooks said, jotting notes in a small book. "Anything else you can remember?" "Horses? Any names they used?" Grace shook her head. "They were careful, but they seemed to know exactly when and where to ambush the stage." The sheriff's expression grew thoughtful. "That suggests either they had information about the schedule or they've been watching the route for a while." "Will you be able to find them?" Grace asked, doubting it was possible in such vast territory. "Can't promise you that, madam, but I'll wire the descriptions to other towns and organize a search party to look for the stage and—" He hesitated. "Recover the bodies of the driver and guard." The reality of what had happened struck Grace anew. 2 men were dead, and she had survived only by chance. "Now," Sheriff Brooks continued, "about your situation. Do you have family or friends you can contact?" "No," Grace admitted. "I was traveling to Sacramento for a teaching position. I have no connections in this region." Hunter, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. "Sheriff, I was thinking. Mrs. Donovan at the boarding house might have a room available, and she's always complaining about needing help with the cooking and cleaning." The sheriff nodded. "That's not a bad idea. Emily Donovan's a good woman, runs a respectable establishment." "I have no money," Grace reminded them, hating to state the obvious but seeing no alternative. "Let's talk to Mrs. Donovan," Hunter suggested. "Maybe you can work in exchange for room and board until you decide what to do next." With few options available, Grace agreed to the plan, after thanking Dr. Wilson, who waved away any mention of payment. Hunters helped me out of enough scrapes to last a lifetime. They made their way to the Alta boarding house. Mrs. Donovan turned out to be a plump, energetic widow in her 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened to their story with growing indignation at the bandits' cruelty. "Of course you can stay here, dear," she assured Grace. "And Hunter's right. I could use the help. I've got 5 regular boarders plus travelers passing through, and these old hands aren't as quick as they used to be." Grace felt a wave of relief wash over her. "I'm a hard worker, Mrs. Donovan. I won't disappoint you." "I don't doubt it," the older woman replied, eyeing Grace's torn dress. "First things first, though, you need a bath and some proper clothes. I've got a daughter about your size who left some things behind when she married and moved to Virginia City. They'll do until you can get situated." Hunter, who had been standing awkwardly in the boarding house parlor, cleared his throat. "If that's settled, I should be getting on to my place." "Still got daylight left." Grace turned to him, suddenly reluctant to see him go. This man had saved her life, and in the space of a day he'd become her only ally in this unfamiliar world. "Mr. Caldwell Hunter," she began, "I don't know how to thank you properly." His blue eyes met hers with unexpected warmth. "No thanks needed, Miss Kelly. I'm just glad I found you when I did." "Grace," she corrected softly. "Please call me Grace." A small smile touched his lips. "Grace, then." He placed his hat back on his head. "I'll check in on you in a day or two, see how you're settling in." After Hunter left, Mrs. Donovan showed Grace to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor of the boarding house. "Bath's down the hall," she explained. "I'll have hot water brought up and I'll find those clothes for you." Left alone, Grace sank onto the narrow bed, the events of the past 2 days crashing over her. She was alive, safe for the moment with the prospect of work and shelter. It wasn't the future she had planned, but she was grateful nonetheless. And unbidden, the image of Hunter Caldwell's face came to her mind, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet strength in his manner. In saving her life, he had given her something more than mere survival. He had given her hope. The following morning, Grace awoke to sunlight streaming through the small window of her room. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, but the events of the previous days quickly came rushing back. She sat up, wincing slightly at the soreness in her muscles and the dull throb in her wounded arm. A knock on the door preceded Mrs. Donovan's cheerful voice. "Grace, are you awake, dear? Breakfast is ready whenever you are." "Thank you, Mrs. Donovan. I'll be down shortly," Grace called back, pushing aside the patchwork quilt and rising to her feet, the clothes Mrs. Donovan had provided were simple but serviceable 2 calico dresses, undergarments, a shawl, and sturdy boots that fit reasonably well. Grace dressed quickly, grateful to be rid of her torn traveling clothes, and made a half-hearted attempt to arrange her hair before giving up and simply braiding it. Downstairs, the boarding house dining room was occupied by several men whom Mrs. Donovan introduced as her regular boarders, Mr. Peterson, the town's only lawyer, Mr. Wilson, who worked at the general store, and brothers Thomas and Frank Cooper, who ran the livery stable. All greeted Grace with polite curiosity, clearly having heard something of her story. "Miss Kelly's going to be helping me run this place," Mrs. Donovan announced as she served a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "So you boys mind your manners around her." "Always do, Mrs. D." Thomas Cooper replied with a grin that suggested he considered himself quite charming. Grace ate ravenously, the simple food tasting like a feast after her ordeal. As the meal progressed, she learned more about Alta from the conversations around her. The town had been established in 1868 after silver was discovered in the nearby hills. The initial boom had settled into a steady prosperity based on mining, ranching, and serving as a supply point for travelers heading to California. "We're growing steady," Mr. Peterson informed her proudly. "Got nearly 500 souls now, a proper church, and talk of building a schoolhouse come spring." Grace's attention sharpened at the mention of a school. "There's no teacher yet. Had one for a spell last year," Mrs. Donovan explained as she refilled coffee cups. "Young fellow from back east who decided mining was more profitable than teaching. Left midwinter, and the children have been running wild ever since. After breakfast, Mrs. Donovan showed Grace the workings of the boarding house, the kitchen with its large cast iron stove, the pantry stocked with preserves and staples, the linen closet with its neatly folded sheets and towels. Grace listened attentively, determined to earn her keep. "I usually serve breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, and supper at 6 in the evening," Mrs. Donovan explained. "Between meals there's cleaning, laundry, baking, and whatever else needs doing. It's a lot for one person, which is why I'm so glad you're here." Grace rolled up her sleeves, mindful of her bandaged arm. "Just show me where to start." The day passed in a flurry of activity as Grace helped prepare the noon meal, learned to operate the wringer washing machine, and assisted in changing linens in the guest rooms. The work was physically demanding but straightforward, and Grace welcomed the distraction it provided from her uncertain future. Late in the afternoon, Sheriff Brooks stopped by with news that a search party had found the stagecoach and recovered the bodies of the driver and guard. "No sign of the bandits," he reported grimly. "But I've sent telegrams to Carson City and other towns with your descriptions. Someone might recognize that turquoise ring." "What about my belongings?" Grace asked, though she held little hope. The sheriff shook his head. "They took everything of value, left some scattered papers and books. I brought what we found." He handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Thanking him, Grace unwrapped the bundle after he left. Inside were a few pages from her journal that had apparently been deemed worthless by the thieves, a tattered copy of Pride and Prejudice that had belonged to her mother, and oddly, her teaching certificate, which must have fallen from her valise during the robbery. Grace ran her fingers over the certificate, its official seal and flowing script confirming her qualifications as a teacher. A plan began to form in her mind. The next morning, after helping Mrs. Donovan prepare and serve breakfast, Grace asked for directions to the mayor's office. Mayor Robert Hamilton turned out to be a former miner who had parlayed his claims into substantial business interests in Alta. His office, attached to the town's only bank, reflected his prosperity with its polished desk and leather-bound ledgers. "Miss Kelly," he greeted her, rising from his chair. "Sheriff Brooks mentioned you'd had some trouble. Terrible business, those stage robberies. What can I do for you?" Grace sat in the offered chair, squaring her shoulders. "Mr. Mayor, I understand Alta is planning to build a school." "Indeed we are," Hamilton confirmed. "Got 15 families with school-age children in town now and more in the outlying ranches. Can't build a proper community without education." "I'm a qualified teacher," Grace stated, placing her certificate on the desk. "I was on my way to a position in Sacramento, but circumstances have changed. If Alta needs a teacher, I'd like to offer my services." Mayor Hamilton studied the certificate with interest. "Ohio State Normal School," he read aloud. "That's a fine institution. You have experience." 2 years teaching in Cincinnati," Grace replied. "All ages, though I specialized in primary education." The mayor leaned back, regarding her thoughtfully. "The school building won't be ready until spring at the earliest. We've been holding classes in the church when we have a teacher available." "I can work with that," Grace assured him. "In the meantime, I'm staying at Mrs. Donovan's boarding house and helping her there." "Hum." Hamilton drummed his fingers on the desk. "Pay wouldn't be much to start, $30 a month plus a room once the school is built. Town council would need to approve, of course, but given our situation, I don't foresee objections." Grace felt a surge of hope. It wasn't the position she had planned in Sacramento, but it was a chance to use her training and build a life in Alta. "I would be very grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Mayor. Let me bring it up at the council meeting tomorrow evening," Hamilton decided. "Can you attend? Say 7 o'clock at the town hall." "I'll be there," Grace promised, rising to leave. As she turned to go, the mayor stopped her. "Miss Kelly, I'm curious. What made you consider staying in Alta? After what you've been through, most folks would be eager to continue to California at the first opportunity." Grace considered the question. "Perhaps it's because Alta is where I found help when I needed it most," she answered honestly. "That seems like a good place to start again." As she walked back to the boarding house, Grace's steps felt lighter than they had since the robbery. She had a plan now, a purpose beyond mere survival. If the town council approved her appointment, she would have a real chance to build a new life here. Her thoughts turned to Hunter Caldwell, who had promised to check on her. 2 days had passed since he'd left her at the boarding house, and she found herself watching the street for his tall figure more often than she cared to admit. Late that afternoon, as Grace was helping Mrs. Donovan prepare supper, a familiar voice at the front door sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Afternoon, Mrs. Donovan. Thought I'd stop by and see how Miss Kelly is settling in." Grace smoothed her apron, suddenly conscious of her appearance, hair coming loose from its braid, flour dusting her hands from the biscuits she'd been making. "Hunter Caldwell, right on time for supper," Mrs. Donovan declared with a knowing smile in Grace's direction. "Grace is doing just fine. Come on through to the kitchen." Hunter appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat less trail-worn than when Grace had last seen him. He'd shaved, and his dark hair was neatly combed. The blue work shirt he wore matched his eyes, though Grace scolded herself for noticing such things. "Miss Kelly," he greeted her with a small nod. "Glad to see you looking better." "Mr. Caldwell," she returned, aware of Mrs. Donovan's interested gaze bouncing between them. "Thank you for coming to check on me. I'm doing quite well, thanks to your help and Mrs. Donovan's kindness." "Grace has been a godsend," Mrs. Donovan declared. "Best help I've had in years. Hunter, you'll stay for supper, won't you? We've got plenty." Hunter hesitated, glancing at Grace. "Don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Mrs. Donovan insisted. "Grace made enough biscuits to feed an army. Besides, I want to hear how that cattle sale went in Carson City." As Mrs. Donovan busied herself setting an extra place at the kitchen table for Hunter before the regular boarders arrived for the dining room, Grace found herself alone with her rescuer for the first time since their arrival in Alta. "Your arm healing all right?" Hunter asked, nodding toward her bandage visible beneath her rolled-up sleeve. "Dr. Wilson says it's coming along nicely," Grace replied. "Hardly hurts at all now." A moment of awkward silence fell between them before both spoke at once. "I wanted to thank you again. Sheriff Brooks said they both stopped, and Hunter gestured for Grace to continue. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said. "Not just for finding me, but for bringing me here to Alta. Everyone has been so kind." Hunter's expression softened. "Glad to hear it. Alta's a good town with good people." "I've met with Mayor Hamilton," Grace continued, feeling oddly nervous. "He's considering me for the teaching position once the new school is built. In the meantime, I'll be helping Mrs. Donovan here." Surprise and what looked like pleasure crossed Hunter's face. "You're planning to stay in Alta," Grace nodded. "If the town council approves my appointment tomorrow evening." "They'd be fools not to," Hunter said with unexpected conviction. "Alta needs a proper teacher." His support warmed Grace more than it should have. "What about you? How is your ranch?" "Same as I left it," Hunter replied with a small smile. "Cattle settled in fine. Got some fencing to repair tomorrow, but nothing urgent." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the boarders for supper, and soon the kitchen was filled with the bustle of serving food and the hum of conversation. Hunter took a seat at the kitchen table with Grace and Mrs. Donovan rather than joining the men in the dining room, a choice that drew raised eyebrows from Thomas Cooper, but no comment. Throughout the meal, Grace found herself increasingly aware of Hunter's presence, the deep timbre of his voice, as he discussed cattle prices with Mrs. Donovan, the way his large, work-roughened hands handled the delicate china cups with surprising gentleness, the occasional glances he cast in her direction when he thought she wasn't looking. After supper, as Grace cleared the dishes, Hunter rose to leave. "Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Donovan. Best I've had in a long while." "You can thank Grace for the biscuits," Mrs. Donovan replied with a wink. "Girl has a magic touch with dough." Hunter turned to Grace. "The biscuits were excellent, Miss Kelly." "Grace," she reminded him softly. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Grace, then." He settled his hat on his head. "Good luck with the council tomorrow. I'd attend myself, but I've got a delivery coming from Carson City I need to be at the ranch for." "Thank you," Grace said, oddly disappointed that he wouldn't be there. At the door, Hunter paused. "I was thinking, if you're free on Sunday after church, maybe I could show you around Alta properly. Town's not much, but there's some pretty country roundabout." The invitation caught Grace by surprise. "I'd like that," she found herself saying before she could consider the propriety of accepting. "Good," Hunter said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "I'll come by after the service then." After he left, Mrs. Donovan gave Grace a speculative look. "Hunter Caldwell doesn't usually take time for social calls," she observed. "Spends most of his days at that ranch of his." Grace busied herself with the dishes, hoping the older woman wouldn't notice the color rising in her cheeks. "He was just being kind, checking on me after what happened." "Hum," Mrs. Donovan murmured, clearly unconvinced. "Well, he's a good man, Hunter is. Keeps to himself mostly, but there's not a person in Alta who wouldn't vouch for his character." That night, as Grace prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about Hunter's invitation and the warmth in his blue eyes when she'd accepted. It was foolish to read anything into it, she told herself sternly. The man had simply been kind to a woman in distress, nothing more. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, it was Hunter's face she saw, not as he'd appeared when he first found her on the trail, but as he'd looked tonight, clean-shaven and smiling, asking if she would join him on Sunday. The town council meeting the following evening proved less intimidating than Grace had anticipated. Mayor Hamilton introduced her to the 5 council members, who listened attentively as she outlined her teaching experience and philosophy. "We can't offer the amenities you'd find in a city school," Councilman Wilkes warned. "No fancy textbooks or equipment." "Children don't need fancy equipment to learn," Grace replied confidently. "They need structure, encouragement, and someone who believes in their potential." The vote, when it came, was unanimous in her favor. Grace would begin teaching the following Monday in the church, with supplies to be ordered from Carson City immediately. $30 a month as discussed, Mayor Hamilton confirmed, shaking her hand. Payable at the end of each month. Once the school building is complete, you'll have living quarters attached. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members," Grace said, barely containing her excitement. "I won't disappoint you." As she walked back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars, Grace felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since leaving Ohio. Alta might not have been her intended destination, but perhaps it was where she was meant to be all along. Sunday dawned clear and mild, a perfect late spring day in the Nevada high country. Grace attended the morning service at Alta's small white church, sitting beside Mrs. Donovan and trying not to glance too obviously at the door every time someone entered. Hunter arrived just as the service was beginning, slipping quietly into a back pew. Grace caught a glimpse of him as she turned during a hymn, freshly shaved again, wearing what appeared to be his best shirt and a clean pair of trousers. Their eyes met briefly across the church, and he gave her a small nod that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. After the service, as congregants gathered outside to socialize, Hunter made his way through the crowd toward Grace and Mrs. Donovan. "Ladies," he greeted them, touching the brim of his hat. "Beautiful morning." "Indeed it is," Mrs. Donovan agreed. "Perfect day for showing our new teacher around, wouldn't you say?" Hunter's expression suggested he knew exactly what the older woman was implying. "That was my hope if Miss Kelly is still agreeable." "Of course," Grace replied, suddenly aware of curious glances from other townspeople. "I've been looking forward to it." Mrs. Donovan's knowing smile made Grace blush. "Don't worry about getting back for dinner, dear. I can manage just fine." Hunter had brought a buggy rather than his horse, a consideration that Grace appreciated. As they set off down Alta's Main Street, Grace felt both excited and nervous. This was the first time she'd been alone with a man in a social context since arriving in Nevada, and she wasn't entirely sure what was expected. Hunter seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Thought we might head out to the lake first," he suggested. "It's about 3 miles east of town. Pretty spot." "That sounds lovely," Grace replied, relaxing slightly. "I understand from the town council meeting that I'll be teaching almost 30 children starting tomorrow. Some of them live quite far from town." "Ranching families mostly," Hunter confirmed. "Good kids, though a bit wild. Haven't had much consistent schooling." "That will change," Grace said with determination, making Hunter smile. "I don't doubt it," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "Congratulations on getting the position, by the way. Town's been needing a proper teacher for a long while." As they drove, Hunter pointed out landmarks, the silver mine that had put Alta on the map, the creek that provided the town's water, ranches belonging to various families whose children would soon be Grace's pupils. Grace listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her genuine interest in her new community. The lake, when they reached it, proved as beautiful as Hunter had promised, a clear expanse of blue water nestled among rolling hills dotted with pine trees. Hunter helped Grace down from the buggy and spread a blanket in the shade of a large pine, where they could look out over the water. From a basket in the buggy, he produced a simple but appetizing picnic: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples, along with a jug of lemonade. "Mrs. Donovan's doing," he explained as he set out the food. "When I mentioned taking you for a drive, she insisted on providing this." Grace smiled, touched by the older woman's thoughtfulness. "She's been very kind to me." "Emily Donovan's got a good heart," Hunter agreed. "Lost her husband in a mining accident 5 years back. Could have left Alta, gone back east to her family, but she stayed, built that boarding house into something that supports her and provides a service to the town." "She's remarkable," Grace said, accepting a piece of chicken from Hunter. "Like many of the women I've met here, there's a strength to them that's different from what I knew back in Ohio." Hunter nodded thoughtfully. "Frontier life demands it, I suppose. Men and women both have to be resilient out here. As they ate, their conversation flowed more easily than Grace had expected. Hunter told her about his journey west after the Civil War, working cattle drives across Texas and New Mexico before saving enough to buy his land near Alta 3 years ago. "War changed everything," he said quietly. "Couldn't go back to the way things were before, but wasn't sure where I belonged after." "Did you find it?" Grace asked. Belonging, Hunter's eyes met hers, unexpectedly intense, getting closer to it every day. Something in his gaze made Grace's heart beat faster, and she looked away, focusing on the lake's shimmering surface. "It's beautiful here," she said, changing the subject. "So different from Ohio. There, everything is green and gentle. Here, the landscape has edges." "Harsh but honest," Hunter observed. "Shows you exactly what it is, no pretense." "I think I prefer that," Grace admitted. "In Cincinnati, after my parents died, I discovered how much pretense there was among people I'd considered friends. When our financial situation became known, many doors closed." Hunter's expression darkened. "Their loss." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, warmed Grace more than the spring sunshine. "Thank you for bringing me here today," she said, "and for everything else." "I'm not sure I've properly expressed my gratitude." "You have," Hunter assured her. "More than enough." He hesitated, then added, "Truth is, I've enjoyed your company. It's been a long time since I've had occasion to spend an afternoon just talking with someone." The admission touched Grace deeply. There was a solitude about Hunter Caldwell that she'd sensed from their first meeting, not loneliness exactly, but a man accustomed to his own company, perhaps by necessity rather than choice. After they finished eating, Hunter suggested a walk along the lakeshore. As they strolled, Grace gathering wildflowers that grew near the water's edge, Hunter told her more about Alta and its resident stories that revealed his deep connection to the community despite his somewhat solitary lifestyle. "You know everyone so well," Grace observed. Hunter shrugged. "Small town. Everyone knows everyone's business." "Is that why you live outside of town?" she asked, then wondered if the question was too personal, but Hunter didn't seem to mind. "Partly," he acknowledged. "I like the quiet and having space around me. Town's fine for visiting, but I need sky overhead at night." Grace understood that feeling better than she would have before her journey west. The vastness of the landscape had frightened her at first, but now she found herself appreciating its wild beauty. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly returned to the buggy for the drive back to Alta. Grace found herself wishing the day wouldn't end, a sentiment that both surprised and concerned her. She had known Hunter Caldwell less than a week. It was far too soon for such feelings. Yet when he helped her down from the buggy in front of the boarding house, his hands at her waist, she felt that same flutter in her chest she'd experienced in church. "Thank you for a wonderful afternoon," she said, stepping back slightly to regain her composure. "My pleasure," Hunter replied, his eyes warm. "Good luck tomorrow with the children, though I suspect luck has little to do with it." Grace smiled at his confidence in her abilities. "We'll see. First days are always challenging." Hunter nodded. "I've got business in town on Wednesday. Perhaps I could stop by after school lets out, hear how it went." "I'd like that," Grace said, surprised by how much she meant it. As Hunter drove away, Mrs. Donovan appeared in the boarding house doorway, her expression knowing. "Had a nice time, did you?" "Very nice," Grace admitted, unable to suppress her smile. "Mr. Caldwell was a perfect gentleman." "Of course he was," Mrs. Donovan replied. "Hunter Caldwell's got more decency in his little finger than most men have in their entire bodies." She ushered Grace inside. "Now, come tell me everything while we get supper ready." That evening, as Grace prepared her lesson plans for the following day, She found her thoughts continually straying to the afternoon at the Lake Hunter's quiet laughter when she'd told him about her disastrous first day teaching in Cincinnati. The gentle way he'd helped her over rocky patches of shore, the comfortable silences that had fallen between them as they walked. It was foolish to read too much into his attention, she reminded herself. Hunter was simply being kind to a newcomer, someone he'd helped in a moment of crisis. Yet she couldn't deny the connection she felt with him, a sense of understanding that went beyond mere acquaintance. Pushing such thoughts aside, Grace focused on her preparations for school. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, and she needed to be ready. The first day of school proved every bit as demanding as Grace had anticipated. The church, temporarily converted to a classroom with benches and a few small tables, filled with children ranging in age from 5 to 16, many of whom had received only sporadic education before Grace's arrival. "Good morning," she greeted them, hiding her nervousness behind a confident smile. "I'm Miss Kelly, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher." From the back row, a lanky boy of about 14 called out, "How long you staying, miss? Last teacher left after 3 months." Rather than reprimanding him for speaking out of turn, Grace approached his bench. "What's your name?" "Billy Mason," the boy replied, a challenge in his eyes. "Well, Billy Mason," Grace said calmly, "I intend to stay as long as Alta will have me. Now, would you be so kind as to help me distribute these slates to the younger children?" Surprised by her response, Billy hesitated, then nodded and stood to help. It was a small victory, but Grace took it as a promising sign. The day passed in a blur of assessments, introductions, and establishing routines. Grace discovered quickly that the students' abilities varied widely. Some of the older children read quite well, but had little knowledge of arithmetic, while others showed the opposite pattern. She would need to create groups based on ability rather than age, a challenge she looked forward to. By the time the last child left at 3 o'clock, Grace was exhausted but exhilarated. Despite the challenges, she felt she had made a good start. The children had responded well to her firm but kind approach, and even Billy Mason had grudgingly participated in the history lesson. As she gathered her materials, the church door opened and Sheriff Brooks entered, his expression grave. "Miss Kelly," he greeted her. "Got a moment?" "Of course, Sheriff," Grace replied, setting down her books. "Is something wrong?" "Got some news about those bandits who robbed your stage," Brooks said, removing his hat. "Man fitting the description of the one with the turquoise ring was spotted in Elko 2 days ago. Another stage was robbed yesterday on the Carson City route. Same method, driver and guard killed, passengers robbed." Grace felt a chill run through her. "Were there any casualties among the passengers?" "One man shot when he resisted," Brooks confirmed grimly. "Rest were left stranded like you were." "Are you forming a posse?" Grace asked. The sheriff nodded. "Heading out at first light tomorrow with 6 men. Just wanted you to know we're doing everything we can to catch these killers." "Thank you, Sheriff," Grace said sincerely. "Please be careful." After Brooks left, Grace finished gathering her things and walked slowly back to the boarding house, troubled by the news. The memory of the robbery, which had begun to fade somewhat in the past week, came rushing back, the harsh voices of the bandits, the terrifying moment when the knife had sliced her arm, the desolation of being abandoned in the wilderness. She was so lost in these dark thoughts that she nearly collided with someone on the boardwalk. "Whoa there," a familiar voice said as strong hands steadied her. "Everything all right?" Grace looked up to find Hunter watching her with concern. "Hunter." "I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention to where I was going." "No harm done," he assured her, studying her face. "But something's troubling you." Grace hesitated, then explained about the sheriff's visit. "They're forming a posse to go after the bandits." Hunter's expression hardened. Good. These men need to be stopped before they hurt anyone else. He offered his arm. May I walk you back to Mrs. Donovan's? Grateful for his company, Grace placed her hand on his arm. As they walked, Hunter asked about her first day of teaching, and Grace found herself relaxing as she described the children and her plans for organizing their education. Sounds like you've got things well in hand, Hunter commented, impressed by her methodical approach. Those kids are lucky to have you. I hope so, Grace replied. There's so much potential there, especially among the older children. Billy Mason, for instance, he puts on a tough exterior, but he asks some very thoughtful questions during our history lesson. Hunter smiled. Billy's father runs the largest ranch outside of town. Good man, expects a lot from his son. They reached the boarding house too soon for Grace's liking. At the door, Hunter hesitated. I'm riding out with the posse tomorrow, he said quietly. Sheriff Brooks asked for volunteers. Grace felt a spike of alarm. But these men are killers. It's dangerous. All the more reason they need to be stopped, Hunter replied, his expression resolute. I know this country better than most, can track where others might miss signs. Grace wanted to argue but recognized the determination in his eyes. When will you return? Can't say for certain. Depends on the trail. Hunter studied her face. Will you be all right while I'm gone? The question touched Grace. Of course. I have my students to keep me busy. She hesitated, then added, but please be careful. A small smile touched Hunter's lips. I will. And I'll stop by when I get back, let you know what happened. Grace nodded, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye. I'll hold you to that promise. Hunter's expression softened as he gazed down at her. For a moment, Grace thought he might say something more, but instead he simply touched the brim of his hat. Good evening, Miss Kelly. Grace, she reminded him softly. Grace, he echoed, the single word carrying a warmth that stayed with her long after he had gone. The posse was gone for 5 days, during which Grace threw herself into establishing her classroom routines and getting to know her students better. She tried not to think about the danger Hunter and the others might be facing, but each evening she found herself watching the road into town, hoping for their return. On the 5th day, as Grace was dismissing her students, Billy Mason lingered behind. Miss Kelly, he said, uncharacteristically hesitant, Pa says the posse is coming back. Saw them from our place about an hour ago. Grace's heart leapt. Thank you, Billy, she said, keeping her voice steady despite her excitement. That's good news. The boy nodded, then blurted, Mr. Caldwell was with them. Pa says he's the one who tracked down those bandits. Surprise mingled with pride in Grace's chest. Is that so? Yeah, Billy confirmed with adolescent enthusiasm. Pa says Mr. Caldwell can read sign better than any Apache. Followed those bandits right to their hideout. Were they captured? Grace asked, trying not to show how much the answer mattered to her. Billy's expression sobered. 2 of them. 3rd one got shot. Pa didn't say more than that. After Billy left, Grace hurriedly gathered her things and walked toward the center of town, where a crowd had already begun to gather. As she approached, she saw Sheriff Brooks and his men riding in, dust-covered and weary. 2 men with their hands bound rode in the middle of the group, and a body was draped over a 3rd horse. Grace scanned the riders anxiously until she spotted Hunter near the rear of the procession. Relief flooded through her at the sight of him, apparently unharmed though as dusty and tired as the others. The crowd pressed forward as the posse reached the jailhouse, making it impossible for Grace to get closer. She stood on the edge of the throng, watching as the prisoners were led inside and the body was taken to the undertakers. Gradually, the crowd dispersed as the excitement waned. Grace remained, hoping for a glimpse of Hunter, but he seemed to have disappeared along with several of the other posse members. Disappointed, she turned to head back to the boarding house, only to find Hunter standing a few feet away, watching her. "Hunter," she breathed, unable to hide her pleasure at seeing him. "Grace," he replied, his voice weary but warm. "Heard you've been keeping Alta's children in line while we were gone." "I've been trying," she said with a smile. "Billy Mason told me you were the one who tracked the bandits." Hunter shrugged modestly. "Had some experience tracking during the war, came in useful." Grace studied his face, noting the fatigue in his eyes and the several days' growth of beard on his jaw. "You look exhausted." "Been a long few days," he admitted, "but worth it. Got 2 of them in custody, including the one with the turquoise ring. They'll stand trial in Carson City next month." "And the third?" Grace asked quietly. Hunter's expression hardened slightly. "Didn't give us a choice. Drew on Sheriff Brooks when we found their camp. Brooks is a good shot." Grace nodded, understanding what remained unsaid. "I'm just glad you're back safely." Something shifted in Hunter's eyes at her words. "Need to report to the mayor, then get back to my ranch," he said. "Been neglecting things there." "Of course," Grace replied, trying to hide her disappointment. "You must be anxious to get home." Hunter hesitated, then said, "Sunday's the town social. Annual spring dance at the town hall. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" The invitation caught Grace by surprise. The town social would be a public event, and attending with Hunter would certainly cause talk among Alta's residents. Yet looking into his earnest blue eyes, Grace found she didn't care what anyone might say. "I'd be delighted," she answered sincerely. The smile that broke across Hunter's tired face was worth any gossip that might result. "I'll come by Mrs. Donovan's at 6 then." As he walked away toward the mayor's office, Grace couldn't help the flutter of excitement in her chest. A town dance with Hunter Caldwell, it was far more than she would have dared hope for a week ago. At the boarding house, Mrs. Donovan was predictably thrilled by the news. "Well now," she said with a satisfied smile, "this calls for something special to wear. Let me see what I can find." The something special turned out to be a dress of deep blue silk that Mrs. Donovan had worn to her daughter's wedding 2 years earlier. "Bit out of style now," she admitted as she held it up for Grace's inspection. "But with some alterations, it'll be perfect for you." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of teaching and preparations for the dance. Grace hadn't seen Hunter since the posse's return, but she'd heard from various townspeople that he'd been busy at his ranch, making up for his absence. By Sunday evening, Grace was both excited and nervous as she prepared for the dance. Mrs. Donovan had worked wonders with the blue dress, adjusting it to fit Grace perfectly. With her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style and wearing a borrowed pair of pearl earrings, Grace hardly recognized herself in the small mirror. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Donovan declared as she made final adjustments to the dress. "Hunter Caldwell won't know what hit him." Grace blushed at the older woman's frank assessment. "Mrs. Donovan, I hardly think—" "Oh, I think a great deal," Mrs. Donovan interrupted with a knowing smile. "And I've seen the way that man looks at you. Known Hunter for years, and I've never seen him show interest in any woman until you came along." Before Grace could respond to this startling statement, there was a knock at the front door. Mrs. Donovan hurried to answer it, leaving Grace to take one last look in the mirror and gather her courage. When she descended the stairs moments later, the expression on Hunter's face made every moment of nervousness worthwhile. He stood in the parlor wearing a dark suit that must have been kept for special occasions, his hair neatly combed, hat in hand. At the sight of Grace, he seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "Miss Kelly," he finally managed, "you look incredible." "Thank you," Grace replied, warmth spreading through her at the genuine admiration in his eyes. "You look quite handsome yourself, Mrs." Donovan watched this exchange with evident satisfaction. "Don't you two make a picture," she observed. "Now go on, enjoy yourselves. And Hunter, mind you bring our teacher home at a reasonable hour. She has school to teach tomorrow." The town hall had been transformed for the spring social, decorated with wildflowers and colorful bunting. A small band played lively tunes at one end of the room, while tables laden with food and drink lined the opposite wall. When Grace and Hunter entered together, several heads turned in their direction, and Grace heard the unmistakable buzz of whispered comments. "Ignore them," Hunter said quietly, offering his arm. "Small towns run on gossip." Grace smiled up at him. "I don't mind, do you?" Hunter's eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. Not in the least. The evening passed in a blur of introductions, conversations, and dances. Grace met many of her students' parents, all of whom expressed gratitude for her work with their children. Hunter remained close by her side throughout, attentive without being possessive, his quiet presence a comfort in the crowd of mostly strangers. When the band struck up a waltz, Hunter turned to Grace with a question in his eyes. "May I have this dance?" Grace placed her hand in his. "I'd be delighted, though I should warn you, it's been some time since I've waltzed." "Makes two of us," Hunter admitted as he led her to the dance floor. "Last time was probably before the war." Yet when he placed his hand at her waist and took her other hand in his, they moved together with surprising grace. Hunter was a better dancer than he'd let on, guiding her confidently through the steps. "You dance very well for a rancher," Grace observed, smiling up at him. "My mother insisted I learn," Hunter explained, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. "Said no son of hers would grow up without knowing how to conduct himself in civilized company." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Hunter agreed softly. "Would have liked you, I think." The simple statement touched Grace deeply. As they continued to waltz, the room around them seemed to fade away until there was only the music and Hunter's blue eyes looking down at her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. When the dance ended, Hunter didn't immediately release her hand. "Would you like some air?" he asked. "Getting a bit warm in here." Grace nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing and the curious glances being cast their way. Hunter led her outside to the small porch that fronted the town hall, where the cool evening air was a welcome relief after the warmth of the crowded room. Stars sparkled overhead in a clear sky, and the sounds of music and laughter drifted out from the hall behind them. For a moment they stood in companionable silence, watching the few people who strolled along Alta's main street. "Grace," Hunter began, his voice unexpectedly serious, "there's something I've been wanting to say to you." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes." Hunter turned to face her, his expression earnest in the lamplight that spilled from the hall's windows. "When I found your tracks on that trail 2 weeks ago, I had no idea how much my life was about to change." Grace's breath caught at his words. "Hunter, please," he interrupted gently, "let me finish while I have the courage." He took a deep breath. "I know we haven't known each other long, too short a time by most standards, but these past 2 weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness. I've never met anyone like you, Grace." He took her hands in his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm not a man of fancy words, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are deeper than I thought possible in such a short time, and I find myself hoping you might feel something similar." Grace looked up into his face, this man who had saved her life and, in doing so, had given her a new beginning. The answer was so clear in her heart that she wondered how she could have doubted it. "I do," she said simply. "I feel it too, Hunter." Relief and joy transformed his expression. "I don't want to rush you," he assured her. "We can take all the time you need to be certain, but I wanted you to know where I stand." "Thank you for that," Grace replied softly. "After everything that's happened, I never expected to find this, whatever this is becoming between us." Hunter's smile was gentle. "Something worth following, I hope." From inside the hall, the music changed to a slower, more romantic melody. Hunter extended his hand. "One more dance before I take you home." Grace placed her hand in his, a sense of rightness filling her heart. "I'd like that very much." As they returned to the dance floor, Grace was aware of curious eyes following them, but she found she didn't care what anyone thought. Here in Hunter's arms, she had found something precious and unexpected, a sense of belonging, of coming home after a long journey. The weeks that followed the spring social saw a gradual but steady deepening of Grace and Hunter's relationship. True to his word, Hunter didn't rush her, but his attention was consistent and unwavering. He began stopping by the schoolhouse regularly, sometimes to fix a loose floorboard or repair a broken window, other times simply to walk Grace back to the boarding house after classes ended. On Sundays after church, they often rode out to the lake or explored the countryside around Alta, Hunter showing Grace his favorite places: a hidden meadow filled with wildflowers, a ridge that offered views all the way to the Sierra Nevada mountains on clear days, the small creek that ran through his property. The first time Hunter brought Grace to his ranch, about a month after the dance, she understood immediately why he loved it so. The cabin was modest but well built, situated on a gentle rise that overlooked rolling pastures where his cattle grazed. Behind the cabin, tall pines provided shade and shelter from the wind, while the promised year-round stream gurgled nearby, clear and cool even in the growing summer heat. "It's beautiful," Grace said sincerely as they sat on the cabin's small porch, drinking coffee after Hunter had shown her around the property. "So peaceful." Hunter nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Took a long time to find the right place. Knew it when I saw it, though." "I can see why," Grace replied, taking in the vista before them. "There's something honest about it, like you said before, no pretense." Hunter's gaze moved from the landscape to her face, his expression softening. High praise coming from a teacher. Grace smiled at that. "Speaking of teaching, I wanted to ask your opinion on something. Mayor Hamilton mentioned that when the school building is finished, there will be living quarters attached for me." "I'd heard that," Hunter confirmed, a question in his eyes. "It would be convenient," Grace continued, choosing her words carefully, "but I've grown fond of staying at Mrs. Donovan's. She's become like family to me. I was considering asking if I could continue boarding with her, at least for now." Relief flickered across Hunter's face, followed by something that looked like hope. "I think that's a fine idea. Mrs. Donovan would miss you terribly." Grace took a sip of her coffee, gathering her courage. "And what about you? Would you miss me if I moved to the schoolhouse?" Hunter's blue eyes met hers directly. "I'd miss you regardless of where you lived in Alta, Grace. But I'll admit, the thought of you living at the schoolhouse, all alone on the edge of town, I didn't much care for it." The admission warmed Grace more than the summer sun. "Then I'll speak to Mayor Hamilton tomorrow." As summer progressed into fall, Grace's position in Alta became increasingly secure. Her students were making remarkable progress, and parents regularly stopped her on the street to express their gratitude for her dedication to their children's education. The new schoolhouse was taking shape at the edge of town, and though Grace had chosen to remain at Mrs. Donovan's, she looked forward to having a proper classroom with desks and blackboards. Her relationship with Hunter continued to deepen, their feelings for each other growing stronger with each passing week. They were careful to maintain propriety. Hunter always had her back to the boarding house at a respectable hour, and they were never alone together in circumstances that might cause gossip. Yet everyone in Alta seemed to understand that they were a couple, and Grace had grown accustomed to the knowing smiles that greeted them when they attended church or town functions together. One crisp October afternoon, as Grace was tidying the church after dismissing her students, Hunter appeared in the doorway. "Thought I might find you here," he said, removing his hat as he entered. "Got something to show you if you've got time." Curious, Grace set aside the books she'd been organizing. "Of course, what is it?" Hunter smiled mysteriously. "It's a surprise. Need to ride out to the ranch, though." They rode double on Hunter's horse, a practice that had become familiar over the past months. Grace enjoyed these rides, the closeness they allowed, the comfort she found in Hunter's steady presence behind her. When they reached the ranch, Grace noticed something different immediately. There was a new corral beside the barn, and inside it stood a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. "Hunter," Grace breathed, sliding down from the saddle before he could help her. "Whose horse is that?" Hunter dismounted, watching her reaction with barely concealed anticipation. "Well, that depends on whether you like her or not." Grace turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You mean?" "Figured if you're going to keep visiting out here, you ought to have your own horse," Hunter explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "And with winter coming on, the trails will get rough. Thought you might like being able to ride on your own when weather permits." Tears sprang to Grace's eyes at his thoughtfulness. "She's beautiful." "Her name's Penny," Hunter said, leading Grace toward the corral. 4 years old, gentle disposition but spirited enough to make riding interesting. Owner over in Carson City was selling her because his daughter got married and moved east. Grace approached the fence, and the mare came forward curiously, stretching her neck to investigate this new person. Grace extended her hand, letting Penny sniff her before gently stroking the horse's velvety nose. "Hello, Penny," she said softly. "Aren't you lovely?" Hunter watched them, satisfaction evident in his expression. "She likes you already." "Hunter, this is too much," Grace protested, though she couldn't tear herself away from the beautiful animal. "A horse is an expensive gift." "Got her for a fair price," Hunter assured her. "And she's worth every cent to see that smile on your face." Grace turned to him, overwhelmed by his generosity. "Thank you. I don't know what else to say." Hunter stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Say you'll ride with me whenever you can. Say you'll let me teach you the trails so you can come out here anytime you want." The implications of his words that he wanted her presence at his ranch to be a regular, expected thing filled Grace with happiness. "I'd like that very much." Hunter's smile deepened as he gazed down at her, his blue eyes warm with an emotion that needed no words. Slowly, giving her plenty of time to step away if she wished, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was their first kiss, and Grace found herself responding with a fervor that might have embarrassed her under other circumstances. Hunter's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, expressing all the feelings that had been building between them over the past months. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Hunter rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that for a very long time," he admitted. "What took you so long?" Grace asked with a smile that belied the racing of her heart. Hunter chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Wanted to be sure you wouldn't slap me for my presumption, Miss Kelly." "I think we're well past that point, Mr. Caldwell," Grace replied, her voice warm with affection. Hunter's expression grew more serious as he gazed down at her. "Grace, there's something else I want to ask you." The tone of his voice sent a flutter of anticipation through Grace's chest. "Yes." Taking a deep breath, Hunter stepped back slightly, still holding her hands in his. I know this might seem sudden to some, though it doesn't feel that way to me. These past months getting to know you, falling in love with you, they've been the happiest of my life. Grace's breath caught at his words. Though she had known his feelings ran deep, this was the first time either of them had spoken of love. When I found your tracks on that trail, Hunter continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction, I was just following instinct. Had no idea I was following a path that would lead to you. To this feeling I have whenever I'm with you, like I've finally found where I belong. Emotion swelled in Grace's heart as she recognized the truth of his words, how perfectly they matched her own feelings. Grace Kelly, Hunter said, his blue eyes holding her steadily, I love you. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Though she had sensed the question was coming, the reality of it still took Grace's breath away. Looking into Hunter's face, this good, honorable man who had saved her life and then, day by day, had shown her what true partnership could be, she knew her answer with absolute certainty. Yes, she said, her voice clear despite the tears that threatened. Yes, Hunter, I will marry you. Joy transformed Hunter's face as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, he kissed her again, this time with a tenderness that spoke of promises and shared tomorrows. I don't have a ring yet, he admitted when they broke apart. Wanted to be sure of your answer before I rode to Carson City to get one. I don't need a ring, Grace assured him, though touched by his consideration. Just you. Hunter shook his head, smiling. My mother would haunt me if I didn't do this properly. Besides, I want everyone in Alta to know you've agreed to be my wife. The word wife sent a thrill through Grace. After the loss of her parents and the theft of everything she owned, she had arrived in Alta with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now, just 6 months later, she had a purpose, a community, and a man she loved who wanted to share his life with her. When, she asked, practical considerations beginning to surface through her happiness. The school term runs until Christmas, and I wouldn't want to leave the children without a teacher. After Christmas, then, Hunter suggested. Give us time to prepare. Maybe New Year's Day. Seems fitting to start our life together at the beginning of a new year. Grace nodded, liking the symbolism. New Year's Day it is. They spent the remainder of the afternoon discussing plans, how the cabin would need expanding to accommodate a wife and, eventually perhaps children, where they would hold the wedding ceremony, whom to ask to stand with them. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Hunter reluctantly saddled his horse to take Grace back to town. I wish I didn't have to leave, she admitted as he helped her mount. Hunter's expression mirrored her reluctance. Few more months, he reminded her, swinging up behind her. Then you'll be coming home to stay. The word home resonated deeply with Grace. Hunter's ranch, with its simple cabin and beautiful surroundings, already felt more like home than any place she had lived since her parents' death. As they rode back to Alta in the gathering dusk, Grace leaned back against Hunter's chest, contentment filling her heart. From the moment she had been left alone on that trail, frightened and wounded, to this moment of complete happiness, her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. Hunter's arms tightened around her, as if he could read her thoughts. What are you thinking about, future Mrs. Caldwell? The sound of that name, her future name, brought a smile to Grace's lips. I was thinking about footprints, she replied truthfully. How yours led to me and mine led to you, and somehow they've brought us here to this perfect moment. Hunter pressed a kiss to her hair. And they'll lead us forward together from here to forever. As Alta's lights appeared in the distance, Grace knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, she and Hunter would face them side by side. Their path, which had begun with an act of desperate courage and compassion on a lonely trail, now stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. The wedding of Hunter Caldwell and Grace Kelly took place, as planned, on New Year's Day, 1877. The entire town of Alta turned out for the celebration, filling the small church to capacity. Mrs. Donovan, who had become like a mother to Grace, wept openly as she watched her young friend walk down the aisle in a dress of ivory satin that had been ordered specially from Carson City. Hunter, standing at the altar in a new black suit, his face clean-shaven and his eyes never leaving Grace as she approached, looked to many observers like a man who couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Billy Mason, who had become one of Grace's most promising students and had developed a boyish admiration for his teacher, served as ring-bearer, carrying the gold band that Hunter had indeed purchased in Carson City. The celebration afterward, held in the town hall, lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and feasting and many toasts to the couple who had come to embody for many in Alta the spirit of their community resilience, hard work, and the belief that even from hardship, something beautiful could grow. As Hunter and Grace drove away in the wagon that would take them to their ranch, the townspeople showered them with rice and good wishes. Grace, looking back at the gathering of people who had become her friends and neighbors in the space of half a year, felt a surge of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place. "Happy, Mrs. Caldwell?" Hunter asked, his voice warm as he guided the horses along the moonlit road. Grace turned to her husband, love filling her heart. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Hunter's smile was tender as he reached for her hand. "This is just the beginning, Grace, just the beginning of forever." And as they rode together toward their home, Grace knew he was right. The trail that had begun with fear and desperation had led to love, to family, to a future bright with promise. It was a path she would follow gladly with Hunter by her side, for all the days to come. 5 years later, Grace stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, no longer just a cabin but a proper home with multiple rooms, including a nursery, watching as Hunter taught their 3-year-old son James to ride a gentle pony in the yard. Their 1-year-old daughter Elizabeth slept peacefully in the cradle beside her, the spring breeze gently rocking her. Alta had grown as well in those 5 years, becoming a thriving town with a permanent school building where Grace still taught 3 days a week, sharing duties now with another teacher. Hunter's ranch had prospered too. His cattle herd nearly doubled in size, allowing them to build the home they had dreamed of together. As she watched her husband lift their laughing son from the pony and swing him high in the air, Grace felt the familiar wave of contentment that had become the foundation of her life. From the darkest moment of her life, abandoned, injured, alone on that trail, had come this abundance of joy, this family, this love. Hunter looked up, catching her eye across the yard, and the smile they shared held all the warmth and understanding of their years together. He set James down, whispering something in the boy's ear that sent him running toward the house, arms outstretched. "Mama, I rode the pony all by myself," he declared as he climbed the porch steps. Grace knelt to embrace him, breathing in the scent of sunshine and dust in his hair. "I saw you, my brave boy. You did wonderfully." Hunter followed at a more measured pace, his eyes taking in the scene of his wife and children on the porch of their home with evident satisfaction. At 37, the years had only added character to his handsome face, a few strands of silver appearing at his temples. "Think we've got another rancher in the making," he observed, ruffling James's dark hair. "Or perhaps a teacher," Grace countered with a smile. "He loves his books as much as his pony." "He can be both," Hunter replied, sitting beside her and lifting the sleeping Elizabeth from her cradle. The baby stirred but didn't wake, nestling against her father's broad chest. Our children can be anything they want to be. Grace leaned against Hunter's shoulder, watching as James began a game of chase with their dog, a stray that had wandered onto the ranch 2 winters ago and never left. "You ever think about it?" she asked softly. That day on the trail, Hunter nodded, understanding immediately what she meant. "Every day," he admitted. "Every time I look at you, at our children, how close I came to missing all of this. If you hadn't found my tracks," Grace began. "But I did," Hunter interrupted gently. "I found them and I followed them and they led me to you." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best tracking I ever did." Grace smiled, turning her face to meet his lips with hers. "I love you, Hunter Caldwell." "And I love you, Grace Caldwell," he replied, the words as heartfelt now as they had been when first spoken years ago. "Forever and always." As the sun began to set over the Nevada landscape, casting the ranch in a golden glow, the Caldwell family sat together on their porch, secure in the knowledge that the trail that had once seemed so desperate and uncertain had led them exactly where they were meant to be, home together, forever.